Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Debate Circle. This is a brand new segment of Who's in the Circle. Ideally, it's a cross-generational conversation. We are having experts from different fields who we're here to ask questions and learn from as the Debate Circle. So I'm your host for today, Bilo Mondi, and I'll introduce our guest today.
All right, my name is Charles Opiyo. What else do you want to know about me? I'm 55.
That's good. That's a good one.
It's a good one. So at least I've made more mistakes than you, so that's good. And married, grown-up children, a grandfather. I wear two hats, and that's why maybe I'm on this show. One hat is a term that's becoming much more popular today. For a long time, nobody understood what it meant, was a futurist. And I wear another hat, outside of being a consultant, a pastoral hat, and with its own connotations. So don't prejudge me.
Right. And I think we are hosting you today in the capacity of a futurist.
Excellent.
And just before I throw it to my other colleagues,
Yes.
I just want to know why. Why
Yes.
a futurist? I mean,
Okay.
we're in the age where
Yes.
a lot of the type of careers that are being put out were, you need to be a doctor, an engineer, and everything. And this is very peculiar. Why a
Yes.
futurist?
We're a futurist. Okay. Historically, over time, if you study the history, there's always been futurists. It's just that we never gave them a term.
Okay.
Yeah, these were generally people who would observe what's going on, keep a good record of history to help us avoid mistakes, but at the same time to help us navigate emerging scenarios. These were people who had to be open-minded and very change-oriented, not set in any particular way, but able to look at a situation and say, guys, the way this is going, we may need to go in this direction. And there were futurists in every kind of field. There'd be futurists in medicine, there'd be futurists in all sorts. And these guys birthed the ideas that many inventors picked up on.
Right.
Yes, that brought us to where we are.
That's good. And I think just to our audience, just before I throw it to my colleagues, it is, we're having this conversation today just to try and understand, because from what he's saying, we are understanding trends. They've been studying trends for years. And as young people, it's really important to understand what direction that everything bear for us, business, politics, and everything. And those are what some of the questions today we're going to ask are. In what direction are we moving? So at this point, I think I'll throw it to Stephanie. You can kick us off. Let's hear what we have
All
to say.
right.
Yes.
My name is Stephanie Washea.
Yeah.
I am a student I wouldn't even call it profession, but I'm a student. I am also a co-founder alongside these two wonderful people.
Yes.
And we're absolutely delighted to have you here today. Before we can bury your second hat, I think I'd want to ask you, what is the nexus between these two particular careers? When you're on one side,
Yes.
a preacher, a pastor, and on the
Yes.
other side, you're
Yeah.
also a futurist. While it
Okay.
may sound like, of course, now you have been in spaces that you have been in government advisory, etc.,
Yes.
etc. So I
Yes.
think one might be curious.
Yes.
How do these two exist within one person without chaos?
Okay. Usually these are adversarial positions. Naturally, because one is primarily tasked with the mindset of finding out, find to the future, and the other one seems to have a mindset of exit. How quickly can we get out of this earth? And where this married for me is when I did look at scripture from a whole new unbiased. See, what futurism does to you, it causes you to have unbiased looks. You deal with issues like confirmation bias. You don't accept things at face value. You go in and look for the value. And it's interesting that if you properly study scripture, you find that all the people in scripture's primary focus was the future, not exit. Every prophet spoke about a coming economy, a changing environment. And once that changes for you, you see characters in the Bible completely differently. You see Joseph as this advanced technological guy who was able to come up with an innovation that preserved people in the famine. Now suddenly the fields merge. Joseph's primary reason was not how quickly do we get out of Egypt. It's how do we survive the drought. Not just an idea, but a technology. Actually, I don't think we have technology yet that preserves seed for 7 years and you can plant it. That's how the Bible appears to me. So when I say pastor, preacher, I'm bringing this thrust into a people who have been left behind. Listen, Africa predominantly, we are looked at as the poor continent. One of my heart positions. In fact, at the end of this, in February, I'll be in Liberia again. I'm doing some work there. Liberia is 97% Christian. More minerals than we'll ever dream of in this nation and other factors. But it's probably the third poorest nation in the world. And there's a correlation between that. There's a correlation between a Christianity that is in exit mode and poverty, and a Christianity that is in execution mode and wealth. And this is the problem. So that's how my two fields marry. Why? Because predominantly our thinking is based on a religious base. I need to fix that. Otherwise, every other idea we're talking about, if you think COVID came to exit us, you will not invest. If you think COVID is the end of the world, you're going to a banker. If you see COVID as opportunities, you're going into innovation. But what could be affecting that thinking? Your religious upbringing. So we have to hack that brain and correct it.
I think just from that already, we are getting the conversational vibe that we really need from this, and I hope we are learning even as we go through this. So we'll just get straight into some of the questions we had, and I think Jen will take us through this here.
Yeah.
So we have different varieties of questions, especially from a futuristic aspect.
Yeah.
And this is in regards to what the young people, especially in Kenya or African spaces, are going through.
Yes.
A lot of what we do have an aspect of we don't know about tomorrow.
Yeah.
Or we really want to know what tomorrow looks like.
Yes.
In different aspects, in social, economic, and political angles, right? And we just want to understand, are we in the right direction? So I think at this point, Jin, you'll just pick us up into what's the first question we'd want to ask our guest today.
At this point, it feels underwhelming to even introduce myself because I'm like, what am I saying? So my name is Jane
Yes.
Acheng. By profession, I'm an environmental scientist.
Exactly.
And I'm also part of the co-founders of the Debate Circle.
Yes.
I really can't add anything beyond that. After hearing you speak,
Yes.
you really bring out the concept of religion and Africa and how futuristic or how innovative we can be, and how that same aspect is hindering us. So maybe just to kick us off, our first question goes at, what do you think the future holds for the robust startup culture in Africa, which carries like a whole entrepreneurial hope? You know, every time we talk about Africa in the startup space, that's the unsaturated market, it's the untapped market, it's the place where companies need to go and figure out. You know, we see things like Netflix, Spotify, and all of them are innovations from the West coming in to disrupt markets that were unsaturated. Then the question becomes, so where were Africans, you know? Because we tend to ask ourselves, startup culture, unsaturated market, but why can't Africans make products that already have consumers here? Because if the West can sell it here, then basically just what is the future?
What does it look like? That's a mixed bag of goods, and I'll tell you why it's a mixed bag of goods. It's a mixed bag of goods because there are so many disjointed factors that need to be brought into the same space. I'll give you an example, just basic statistics. Last 2-3 years, okay? Startup funding that has come, African, let's take Kenya, purely Kenyan startups. I think only 1 or 2 Kenyan startups have been able to attract over $1 million. Meanwhile, 70% of so-called African startups run by white, you guys know the story. but let's step back and ask honest questions before we judge. There is a racial component. We agree. But how do you deal with a racial component? You outgrow it. You don't debate it. Because it's a prejudice. And prejudices are not changed until there's a change. It is very hard for a racist to tell himself how to stop being racist. Because he doesn't have a programming structure to think outside that box. All right? That box is built on prejudice, the way I perceive you. So it's not who you are, it's my perception. Now, until I change my perception, I have a problem with seeing you. And that's the one side. But there's a huge contribution from us. Here's the contributor. The contributor is that they don't have enough data to change their mind. There isn't enough evidence that if I put $1 million in your hands, I'm going to get an ROI on it. There isn't proof that you've done anything except give me an idea. You need to understand that any civilization that's over 100, 200 years old has seen ideas forever. We are emerging in the idea environment now. And unfortunately, your generation thinks that ideas equal value. No, it's the idea that affects, changes, transforms that equals value. Now, why do I say we need to look at this bag carefully? That's one issue. The second issue is policy. We have a policy issue. We don't have a startup policy in most of our nations that can protect a startup, or that can insist that if a startup is going on here, these are the bare minimums. That says the guys involved, there must be. I lived in Botswana for 8 years. One of the greatest transformations I have seen in terms of what was in their hands. You know, we know they have a diamond economy. I'm just going to paraphrase us to bring us in. And with that diamond economy, it was managed by the government, but for many years in partnership, literally with a family. So one family and an entire nation. Why? Because the fact that you own diamonds and mine them doesn't mean you can sell them. So what happened? They took time, but there's a point where they said, good, you've made great value as a family on our diamonds, but from now on, we're not going to re-sign any agreement till we change a few things. One, value addition. Value addition meaning you're going to scale our guys. We're not taking diamonds to your country to cut. You're going to train our guys to cut diamonds here. Two, the diamond auctions move here, so that it is bought here. So we benefit from the extra verticals that come from those guys coming into our nation. What does that do to you as youth? Suddenly you want to study diamonds. Not get handouts from diamond income. So generally, that's one of our biggest problems. The problem is that we don't have startup capacity. The problem is that we don't have the policy that guides it, like IP. If it's your idea, how do we protect it? How does it add value? But your generation must also learn how to piggyback. See, this is the problem. You're either going to be a parasite or a pollinator. So just, parasite doesn't care where it draws blood from, eh? Just whatever. But a pollinator is one who adds value everywhere they go. So there's a season. Let me use this example. I say this to young people a lot. Mark Zuckerberg did not start out to be a billionaire. He didn't start out to make this mega organization called Facebook. He started out to communicate with his buddies. It turned into a business. Half the billionaires you talk about simply started to solve a problem. They had no clue. Listen, throw away all those books on how to be a billionaire. There's no single script. There's nobody. Half these guys only wrote books because you asked. Then they had to think backwards and say, what exactly did I do? Okay, let me come up with something because people want to hear something. Otherwise, would have had secondary millionaires on the basis of I read a book.
Right. Yeah, and,
yes.
and I think I just add a question into what you're talking about, because the startup culture really came from a point of there's this bulging numbers of young people, right?
Yes.
And we are constantly, initially we were being pushed into careers just like from way back in the 90s and 80s,
Yes.
Study to be this, study to be that, Then we came into a world that once we're done with our studies, now innovation is kicking up,
Yes.
And it's not the old school type of I just want to be an engineer and that's it,
Yes.
Innovation is driving everything up.
Yes.
So I'll throw the spanner into the works in the sense of we already have a problem in the startup culture.
Yes.
So like you're saying, policy is a problem.
Yeah.
Young people and the way, the piggy banking you're talking about.
Yes.
There's still a whole menace of unemployment that is attached, even more so to this, because from a startup point, it is we are looking at things from I have an idea, how can I actualize it? Now there's a journey to actualization that is troublesome, like you're talking about, right?
Yes.
There's a whole problem of there are people who haven't even been able to secure or gotten to a point of either getting a job or getting an empowerment to even develop this idea. So it's a whole chain of, you're a young person, you want to be innovative, there's a problem around the startup culture. The other alternative is you probably don't have a job, right? So, and looking into how it goes into the future, what is in it for us? We're understanding how the problem looks like, but where are we headed with all this in our hands?
Very quickly, before we transition into the unemployment question, I have two nagging questions. They might not be necessarily related, but then again, I talk a lot. So there's something you've mentioned about racism, and it's triggered a thought in my mind. You've talked about how, and I think I'd like to ask you this question in the essence of, do you consider racism a personal problem, or do you feel like racism has evolved where it is no longer an issue of person X is racist and person Y is racist, but to a point where it is legally and institutionally backed to such a point where even if you did want to not be racist or you wanted to undo racism, we'd have to undo miles and miles of legislation and a social norm that we have built? I think that's the first question. And the second one, of course, is the idea of, you've talked about the fact that we don't have policies. And I think one of the things about youth is that we want things and we want things now. But then again, there's also the element for we question motives for everything. You know, we are always asking ourselves, so what do you get out of this? I think my question is to that effect. Recently, there was the whole drama about the BBI, the document, and there were all these things that were supposed to be done for the youth. In a situation like that, because again, we are cognizant of the fact that we are not going to be picking and choosing. So as youth, do we do right by our problems when we look at the motive? Should we be in a space where the end justifies the means, where we are not too picky about how it got here, just that it got here should be enough? Or are we in a space where we can begin to question motives? Do we have the luxury of questioning motives?
Actually, you got all the questions?
They are related. They are completely related. You can't separate one from the other. And then I'll bring them into context. One, the racism issue. First of all, racism is not just a Western culture thing, because there is a reverse racism, where the victim hates the oppressor. That's still racism. See, we think racism is only when the person who is superior is acting on it. But racism is when the person who is inferior is reacting to it. So that's already the first problem. The second problem on racism, and you know, the racism I can talk on for 6 hours. There's the second problem of what was called the house slave, the field slave, and the free slave. Now that's a big problem. The house slave is the guy who, when the master sneezes, he catches a cold. In other words, he thinks he's the master, but he's a slave. Because he lives in the master's house, he eats the master's clothes, he wears food, he wears the master's old clothes. All right? Then there is the field slave. The field slave is the guy who only acts to avoid pain from the master, not to change anything. It's a survival position. The freed slave is the one who is free but still lives in fear of the master and in the stigma of the pain of the past. And Africa is full of free slaves. And that's where our problem starts. So we need the free person. Slave must go. But that's an internal change, which basically works like this. Now, having used that, let's parallel it with education to show you how connected it is. See, education, just to give an example, Kenya's education system is 200 years behind time. So let's just start there. And here's the problem. We are running with an education system that was developed in the second industrial age. And the primary reasoning for that education system was because the entire world was running off mechanization, factories. And so we needed to create future good factory workers. And that's why you sat in a line, you walked in a line, you were being pre-programmed for the lines. Now what happened in that model, a good student is one who doesn't ask questions, one who doesn't think outside the box, one who doesn't come up with a new way of doing things. It was ingrained. So you can see the racism and the education system. Meanwhile, the people who developed the factories didn't go to school, they developed factories. Just think about that for a moment. And where is Reverse racism. Half of the Kenyans think they are uneducated because they didn't go to slave school.
Wow.
That's deep. That's deep right there.
This is where the problem starts. So you automatically disqualify yourself because you didn't go through a system that is outdated. Our biggest issue today, I'll tell you my biggest battle as a futurist, is causing people to unlearn what they know.
But just on that, so what do we tell to employers that expect that our experience is tagged to our education system?
And I think also to build on that, I think the other question would be on what other merits, I think for the people who are just discovering that they're colonized, what other merits can we use? Because education is a daily thing. So what other merits can we use to gauge that?
I was coming there. See, education has to be rephrased. The word education, from the way we've thought, was to go through class, answer some questions correctly, and then be graded on who answered it better than the other. And if you grew up in my day, there was a very limited category of what you could become. And it was in hierarchy level. Started with the pilot, then the doctor, then the lawyer, then the teacher. And look at how it's going down. And then you end up at policeman. And so you have policemen behaving exactly the way that structure said, when they could have behaved better if they saw it as a career equal to any other. Here's part of our problem. Currently, we are churning out simple maths. We are churning out more people than any system can absorb. So just think about how many graduates we have a year. And then you expect a government that is functioning on half capacity to absorb them. So, no matter what your politician tells you, there are no jobs to be created. Throw that out of the window, rubber stamp it, and go in a new direction. Because it's not going to happen. You see, the old system said, create jobs, fill people in those positions and pay them a fee. Why? Because the factory determined outcome, the factory determined productivity, and as long as the factory was running, fit people in. Now we live in an economy that says we have new problems the factory cannot fix. In fact, close the factory. So here's the new problem. What is education today? In that system, because we also planned our production, we also spaced out education. So the real reason why you spent 10 years in school was to keep you on hold because you will be a problem. Not because you needed it. All right? Now here's a catch. I know your generation have all heard this statement. This guy is a billionaire, but he dropped out of school. No, he didn't drop out of school. He changed schools. Completely different paradigm. He went to a school where you learn how to produce, not how to answer. See, that's the difference. Most Africans are already competent in that school. And I always get tired of people who are skilled looking for a job where their skills will die. So they can get some handout at the end of the month and go home. So you ask the question, what do we change? Fortunately, we live in the digital era where school is permanent. You can learn a new skill every single day. You can learn something else to do every single day. So what we really want from governments is to create opportunities for us to create jobs. We don't want jobs from them. In fact, their jobs won't help us. Because you're asking a guy who was educated in that system to create a job for you. So what he will do, he will give you a desk to type a few things, and then he'll underpay you. So you'll have this relationship. He only pays you enough to keep you, and you only work enough not to be fired.